we may as well start. If there are some latecomers, well, that's it. So as the current Dean of the Faculty of Geoscience and Environment, I would really like to extend a warm welcome to Robert Hazen. We are truly honored to have you amongst us, with the lecture particularly being held here at the University of Lausanne. And the context of it will become clear to you in just a little while. The Howard Flack Lecture Award is conferred annually by the Swiss Society of Crystallography. And while Robert Hazen has received this award for his, and I quote the Swiss Society for Crystallography, for his significant recent contributions to the field of structural science in the chemical, biological, physical, medicinal, or material sciences. To the geologists of our faculty, the excellent and revolutionary really work of Robert Hazen has been known for decades already. So not only his recent contribution for which he got this award and for which we have the presence of Robert Hazen with us, but his work and his revolutionary work goes way back when. In fact, Robert Hazen was the guest editor of a special volume, and I really like this elements because it's from the Geochemical Society. But it is a really nice volume, and if you subscribe even to the Swiss Mineralogical Society, to which also the Swiss Crystallographic Society belongs, you get this for free. Anyway, in 2010, this volume was published as a special issue already in 2010, that's 1.5 decades ago. And the special editor was Robert Hazen, who has, of the 6 papers in it, at least 2 papers in it too, and it is called Mineral Evolution. So now he's added the art with mineral revolution in terms of also data sciences. And so I'm really looking forward to his lecture. And I must say, certainly his work in the past that was culminating in this, which is a review issue, in fact, has long been known and has been part of the curriculum. At least I always mention it in my courses, which I have now given for 20 years here in Lausanne. And so as such, as a geologist and currently the dean of the faculty, I really would like to welcome Robert personally in that sense too. I really look forward to your lecture on data-driven discoveries in mineralogy, yet maybe another revolution, we'll see. I'd also like to thank Johanna Marine Carbon for having invited me to say a word or two, and a special word of thanks, of course, to Pascal Schauwink of the EPFL, who is the member of the Swiss Society for Crystallography. And it's Pascal's work basically that made it all possible that he's even here. So thank you. And
it's also our president.
So I'll allow you to do a more detailed introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the really interesting introduction for me. So my name is Simon Grabowski. I'm the president of the Swiss Society for Crystallography. And I just used the opportunity to say 1 or 2 words about our society. So this is the named lecture series that we confer annually. You see, maybe not every year. There's the Corona break here. But we are very happy that this year we could convince Bob to come to visit us. So as a society, we are part of the Swiss Academy of Natural Sciences. So this is partly also sponsored by them. And our main task is to organize events for the community. So you see the upcoming events like the annual meeting. There's an annual topical workshop. Next year it's about low-angle scattering if you're interested. And of course, the Howard Flack lectures. So this lecture series was established in 2018, 1 year after Howard Flack passed away. And this is also to keep his memory alive. There's a picture of him teaching. He was not only a great crystallographer, but also a great teacher. So we thought this is appropriate to have this lecture series in his name. Thank you. So the next big event is the EPDIC, which is the European Powder Diffraction Conference, which is chaired by Pascal Schauwink. So this is a great event that comes out of Lausanne. It will take place in Crans-Montana, 23rd to 26th of June. So maybe check out the website, which is down here, because we think this is a big international event that we are proud to have in Switzerland again. And with that, we come to Bob's lecture. He has been introduced better than I could. He comes from Washington, D.C., the Carnegie Science Institution, and he also was a professor at George Mason University for many years. He gave general lectures there, which inspired also his work later on. So I think I give the word to you, and we're looking forward to the presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. That's really it's quite an honor to be here and to be able to share with you some of the recent work we've been doing that relates very closely to some of the things that Howard Flack did as well. Are we going to think? No, we're not here.
Well, can you click on OK?
Yeah, that's good. There we go. We live on a planet of breathtaking beauty. It's not on this. I'm so sorry. Maybe someone knows where I should.
Yeah.
It was close.
Oh, are we getting close?
Yeah.
Oh, this is tricky. Not working so well. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what to do about that. Okay. Let me go back. No, not going back.
I should be able to use one pointer.
Trouble finding. I'm so sorry about this. This is a technical. It's not going forward.
That's the bottom of the slide.
Never had this particular problem
Yes, you better
before.
find it.
Yes.
I'm gonna go to the other screen, which is this screen. And then right back. Yeah, I think you should be able to do that with a pointer. Oh, it disappeared.
Well, now at least it's advancing. Okay, okay, I think we're there. I think we're there. Thank you so much for your patience. And please, there are, I think, a couple of seats. Raise your hand. There's a seat next to you because and actually there's a chair here, as long as we're informal, we might as well make sure everybody's coming. Thank you so much. It really is a pleasure to be here, returning to this beautiful city and meeting old friends and many new ones as well. We live on a planet that's remarkably beautiful. This blue sphere with swirling white clouds, glimpses of brown and green continents. And we know when we see this, we live on a dynamic planet. We live on a planet of change. And indeed, this planet has changed through 4.5 billion years. If you know the geological time frame, we go all the way back 4.567 billion years to the origin of our solar system. The first 500 million years or so, very few rocks are part of this Hadean period. Perhaps life originated then. And then we had a long period of time where life was very simple. But suddenly it learned to make oxygen, and oxygenic photosynthesis at about 2,500 million years ago led to the Proterozoic eon, the rise of atmospheric oxygen. We go all the way to the last 500 million years or so, the Phanerozoic, the time when Earth began to look the way we think of our planet, only 10% of its history. So how do we know this? And of course, the reason is minerals, because minerals are individually and collectively the oldest things you can hold in your hand. They tell the stories of the origin, the evolution of planets and moons. And every single mineral specimen is a time capsule, just waiting to be opened because it's information rich. Mineralogy, in fact, is a science of information, and we're moving into the age of mineral informatics. So the importance of minerals, I think, are obvious to everyone, but everything in our industry, when you look outside, all of the buildings, all the cars, the agriculture, even us, our own bodies, come from Earth. Minerals have been a driver of scientific discovery, the periodic table of the elements, X-ray diffraction, but also nature of the chemical bond, the nature of high pressure, many, many different discoveries, many of them leading to Nobel Prizes. Minerals also are key to understanding our neighbors in the solar system, the moon, Mars, other worlds. Because we go and we study the minerals and they hold the history of the planet. And of course, they're unbelievably beautiful. And this is, of course, ever since I was very, very small, minerals have fascinated me because of their beauty. And here's an amazing thing. Our planet's beauty is enhanced by thousands of minerals that occur no place else in our solar system. So one can ask this question, why is Earth so unique in its mineralogy, in its diversity? And the answer lies in a field called mineral evolution, something that I introduced in 2008 in a paper in American Mineralogist, and it basically was looking at the increasing diversity, the distribution of minerals as a consequence of new chemical, physical, and ultimately biological processes. This is what gives Earth its diversity. Now, I'm going to be using a term that may seem a little strange. I'm going to talk about mineral species. And that's a term that's defined by the International Mineralogical Association, the official body that approves minerals. And every mineral species is a naturally occurring solid that has an idealized chemistry, like SiO2, and an idealized crystal structure, like the quartz structure. And every unique combination of chemistry and structure is a species. And we have now a little bit over 6,000 approved species, and about 100 new species are approved every year. So that number is growing. And our predictions, using mineral informatics, are that there may be 9,000 to 10,000 species on Earth. So there's several thousand species still left to be discovered by mineralogists. Now, mineral evolution studies various changes in mineralogy over time, including the diversity, just the sheer number of different minerals, their distribution and the relative abundances, the compositional ranges, and that includes trace and minor elements that aren't necessarily included in the IMA species definition, the sizes and shapes of minerals. These are all part of mineral evolution. We focus on the upper 3 kilometers of Earth's surface because that's what's easiest for us to study. We could extrapolate much deeper. We could say, what's the mineral evolution of the lower crust or the mantle or even Earth's core? That would become highly speculative. Here, we can actually sample from the surface and from mines. This is also what we're likely to see on other planets and moons. And it's where there's direct interaction with biology, which turns out to be extremely important in the evolution of minerals. So here's this key idea. New minerals are formed through a combination of new chemical, physical, biological processes. And we can divide Earth history into a series of stages, each of which shows increasing diversity because of new processes. The earliest stage we call the minerals. These are things that formed well before our solar system. So these could be 5, 6, sometimes 8 or 10 billion years old. And they're minerals that formed around stars, literally star dust, because they're all nano or micro scale phases. They're formed from the elements that are abundant in stellar atmospheres, things like oxygen and silicon and carbon and nitrogen. There are about 25 different minerals in all. They have roughly 16 essential elements, all things that are fairly abundant, relatively abundant in those stellar atmospheres. And the question of mineral evolution then can be narrowed down to how do we start from 25 minerals with 16 essential elements, but now we have 6,000 minerals with 72 essential elements. That's an evolutionary process of change, and it occurs in stages. You can show those stages graphically from 4.5 billion years ago to today, through the stages, and you'll see they're often very much overlapping. But let me just go through them quickly so you get a sense of the qualitative introduction of this idea back in 2008. So, there we go. Sorry, I advanced forward. So stage one are called primary chondrite or chondrule minerals. And this occurred very, very early in our solar system when the sun is just beginning to form and ignite. And there are pulses of heat that come out from the sun. And you can imagine that dust, the star dust that makes part of the early gas and dust of our nebula. Those clump together through electrostatic forces. Basically, they're cosmic dust bunnies. And when you heat them, they melt, they collapse down to little droplets called chondrules, and they form these very primitive meteorites, the most ancient objects you can hold in your hand. And then the chondrules come together, they form planetesimals, relatively small at first, 1 kilometer or 2, then 10, then 50, then 100. And when you get to that size, then you melt the interior of these objects to form an iron nickel rich metal core and a silicate mantle. So you get new minerals that are forming. Those minerals are further altered by water, they're altered by heat, they're altered by impacts. And that gives us about 300 minerals in total that occur in the meteorites that still fall to Earth. They're falling today, and they are going to be on any of our solar system's terrestrial bodies. So we find these on the moon, we find them on Mars, we'll find them on any of the other solid worlds. Stage 3 is when you start forming a planet-sized body. And we think if you have a dry world, like the moon, or maybe Mercury, that you're kind of limited to those 300 minerals. That's a hypothesis we're testing right now. But if you have a wet world, where you have lots of water-rock interactions, then you can start forming new hydroxide minerals and clays, you form ices at the poles, other minerals, get you up to about 450 species. So we think this is what early Earth would look like. We also think this is maybe what Mars today looks like. So the mineralogy of Mars may be very close to that set of 450 minerals. But Earth is larger, it can do different things. The first igneous rock, the molten rock that comes out of volcanoes on Earth, is going to be basalt. And when you have a big planet that's wet, when you start melting that basalt, you partially melt it with water, and the magma that comes out of that is silica rich. It's less dense than the basalt, so it rises to the surface, forming granites. And those granites carry with them concentrations of rare elements like beryllium and lithium and boron, the rare earth elements, uranium in some cases. And so these give you opportunities for a whole new suite of minerals that never occurred before. So here we get up to about 1,000 minerals in granites and the granite pegmatites. And then Earth has even more tricks to play because it's so large and so dynamic, and it has such a large amount of volatiles that lead to convection in the Earth. We get plate tectonics, the process of subduction, where wet crust is plunging down into the lower crust and into the mantle. It causes new partial melts, it causes new kinds of volcanism, which carries with it minerals, for example, the massive sulfide deposits that are so critical to our resources, and hundreds of new minerals here. There's also high pressure, high temperature regimes produced, for example, during mountain building. And when those minerals are exposed from deep in the interior, you get hundreds more minerals, and a total up perhaps to 3,500 minerals on Earth as a consequence of physical and chemical processes. So there we are, 3,500 species. But I've told you we have over 6,000 on Earth today. So how do we go from 3,500 to 6,000? And I've given away that punchline already, I'm afraid. The answer is life. Life plays an astonishing role in the diversification of Earth's near-surface mineralogy. This is kind of amusing to me because I got into this field of mineral evolution through the study of life's origin. And most models of life's origin now require minerals in one form or another. They are reactants, they're catalysts. They have protective surface environments. They create as scaffolding and as templates. for other sorts of organic molecules. And so you really can't do the kinds of organization of organic chemistry you need without mineral surfaces. But then once life arises, it leads to this abundance of new minerals. So here we have the coevolution of the geosphere and biosphere. Stage 6, a period of Earth's history when there were lots of new deposits of phosphates, of carbonates, of iron and manganese oxides. These were produced by microbes that essentially use the chemical energy of the rocks themselves, because when rocks like basalt come up from the mantle, they're electron rich, they're reduced in comparison to the oceans and the atmosphere. And therefore, the microbes basically take the electrons and act like a light bulb would. The electrons pass through the microbes, that's how they get their energy. They're called chemolithoautotrophs, meaning they take the chemical energy of rocks, that's the litho part, and that's how they make their livings. But there are not a lot of new mineral species at this stage, it's just that minerals are redeposited in new ways. But the punctuation event in Earth's mineral history is the great oxygenation event, when life learned to take sunlight and water and create organic material and the waste gas oxygen. And as that oxygen entered the atmosphere, the planet essentially rusted. This occurred about 2.5 billion years ago, and it's shown graphically many different ways, but this is typical 2.5 billion years. You see a big jump in the percentage of oxygen in the atmosphere, and it levels off in some way, and then there's another jump here, which we'll get to in a few minutes. So the main culprit in all this is iron, but there are many, many different elements of the periodic table that are redox sensitive. That is, they can occur in more than one oxidation state. So the first row transition elements, all of which are important to biology, iron and nickel and cobalt and copper and manganese, so forth. These elements, but also other metal elements and nonmetals as well, all the ones that are fundamental to life, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, but others as well. And because all of these elements will react in an oxygen-rich environment to produce new forms, new ions, we have vast amounts of new minerals. They said iron was the big one. The oceans were saturated in iron 2+, ferrous iron, which is soluble. And at this period, when oxygen comes into the atmosphere, the ferrous iron reacts with oxygen, becomes ferric iron, which is insoluble, forms oxides and hydroxides that sink to the ocean floor, form these massive deposits called banded iron formations. The largest iron mines in the world occurred from around this time. And many, many iron minerals that would not have formed prior to the great oxidation event occur here. But many other elements as well, copper, all those beautiful blue and green minerals that I love for museums, these would not have formed before the great oxidation event. There's simply not enough oxidation power in the atmosphere. Most of the uranium minerals, in some estimates, 90% of all the known uranium minerals had to form after Earth's atmosphere became oxygenated. Nickel minerals. And I'm showing this partly just because they're so incredibly beautiful in all those crystal forms. And this is why many of us get into mineralogy in the first place. I love cobalt minerals, the colors and the forms that they present. Thousands of minerals. So this was a huge increase in mineral diversity on Earth as a consequence of the great oxidation event, as a consequence of biology. There follows stage 8, about a 1,000 million year period of Earth's history, where you just basically titrated the oceans. The oceans had lots and lots of ferrous iron. The oxygen was being produced, but as fast as it was produced, it went to oxidizing ferrous iron to ferric iron, and you were at this, what's called the hematite-magnetite buffer. You just sort of stood there for a long time, and only after you oxygenated the oceans could you go on to the next stage. But it also caused these huge fluctuations of Earth's climate, periods called the snowball Earth, when by some models, the entire planet was covered by ice and snow. So ice becomes the dominant mineral. Ice is a mineral, it's H2O in the ice crystal structure. But then hothouse conditions, some models, all of the ice and snow on Earth disappears, it goes extinct. but then it comes back again in a cycle, hothouse, snowball, back and forth. Things settle down, and in the last 500 million years or so, we have the rise of biomineralization, shells, teeth, bones, also life on land, new kinds of plants that have root systems forming huge amounts of clay minerals and other alteration products of that near surface environment that never occurred before. So a whole range of minerals. Coal measures are particularly interesting. These, of course, are dead plants, trees, and other sorts of plant organisms. But when a coal measure catches fire, you have a smelter-like environment, a very reducing environment with all that carbon, and you form hundreds of new minerals just through coal fires, minerals that are ultimately biologically mediated. And I have to share with you, when we talk about biomineralization, the story of trilobite eyes, because it gives you the sense of this co-evolution and a vivid detail. So when the trilobite, I collected trilobites since I was little, and I love the way that they look back at you. They stare at you with these compound eyes. And every one of these little lenses in the compound eye is a single crystal of the mineral calcite. That's calcium carbonate, CaCO3. And the C-axis of that mineral, rhombohedral mineral, is looking out at you. Okay, so that's cool enough. But the trouble is calcite is a terrible eye because red light and blue light bend at different angles. So everything is out of focus. And so to have a pure calcite eye would really not work very well. You couldn't, everything would be blurry. So what happens? Well, evolution seems to find a way. And it turns out if you analyze each of those crystals, they are zoned in magnesium and calcium. So that from the center, radially outward, there's a gradient, there's a zoning of magnesium calcium that exactly corrects for chromatic aberration. Because that's the evolution, that's what works, that's what functions. So this is a remarkable example, and there are many, many others of the way that biology has manipulated the mineral kingdom to achieve a function. Some people say we're now in stage 11, the Anthropocene, where we create all sorts of building materials, we move rocks from their original position to new positions. We have all sorts of inadvertent minerals that form, for example, through mining. But also we very consciously form things like magnetic crystals and electronic crystals, laser crystals, that sort of thing. And this will be a marker layer. Many of these are very stable phases that will last for billions of years, long after we may have left, but we will have a marker layer, the Anthropocene, in which human activities are registered, partly through the unique minerals that we produce. Okay, so this is mineral evolution in a very qualitative story. I think it has a wonderful narrative arc that we have a beginning, a middle, we're up to another point. We're part of that mineral evolution story. Minerals have changed dramatically over many years. There's a sequence, one follows the other in Earth history, and life has been a major factor in diversifying minerals. So this is really great. It represents a new way to frame mineralogy and teach mineralogy, put it in museums. And I have to tell you a story. When I was a young child, my parents moved near New York City. This is the old American Museum of Natural History in New York City from the 1960s. And I would, at least once a month, go in for a Saturday afternoon and study the Dana system. The Dana system is the traditional system that's used where every mineral is classified by its chemical composition and its structure. So you'd have labels on every one of these minerals that said, you know, here's calcite, CaCO3, it's rhombohedral, they give a space group. And that's the way we define minerals. But, you know, that's for most people, I think that probably was a strange thing for a young kid to do, to be looking at label and getting really excited about and learning favorite minerals, because it doesn't really tell much of a story, does it? So imagine how I feel when I was invited to be the guest speaker at the opening of the new American Museum of Natural History exhibit, new mineral and gem hall, 5,000 specimens in this magnificent space arranged by mineral evolution. And the same specimens that I studied and admired when I was little are now arranged differently. They're not in the data system than this system. So that's pretty cool. And then the opening of the Vienna Natural History Museum exhibit and at Paris, at Harvard, at Houston, and at the new big Tucson Gem and Mineral Hall. Again, it's arranged by Mineral Evolution. So this is really special to me because this is now taking minerals and putting them in the context of Earth history in a way that tells a story. And in many ways, I think is more engaging for many people. So I really wasn't expecting that when we published the paper, but that happened. But many of you are thinking, okay, that's great. That's a nice story. But if we're really going to be scientific about evolution, we have to have a much more quantitative approach. It's absolutely essential to put these ideas of what we go from this stage to this stage on some kind of, demonstrable, reproducible, quantitative way. And so we've entered an age of mineral informatics because we now recognize that minerals have incredible amounts of information. And when I say that every mineral is a time capsule, I mean, we have trace and minor elements, dozens of elements, scores of different stable isotopes you can measure. There's solid and fluid inclusions. There's all sorts of structural variations called twinning and exsolution and zoning. Even just the size and shapes of crystals, the age, the modes of formation, the kinds of coexisting minerals, the environment, the geological environment in which the minerals form. These are all pieces of data, information that tell the story. And so I have to say the very first thing we rely on is incredibly comprehensive and professionally done data resources. Bob Downs and the Rough Data Project, every IMA species, many different ways to search things. My group has added the Mineral Evolution Database, where we have about 200,000 mineral locality age data so that we can actually pin the ages of different minerals forming at specific times. Jalion Ralph then has the complementary mindat.org, which has hundreds of thousands. I think it's up like 600,000 localities now, I was told, on approaching 2 million mineral locality pairs with photographs. He's using AI now, so you can take your mineral and show it to your camera and have it identified. Very tricky business, but large language models can do that. And of course, then there's just the publications, centuries of publications on mineralogy containing data. This is our raw material. And it allows us to ask some really big questions about Earth history. So how has the diversity changed through deep time? Can we predict where minerals would occur, especially critical resource minerals? How does Earth's mineralogy differ from other planets and moons? And how do the geosphere and biosphere co-evolve? These are the kinds of questions we want to ask. And so what I want to do is just take you through 4 examples of the kinds of ways we're using these data to understand Earth. First is distribution analysis, something called association analysis, network analysis, and then the evolutionary system of minerals, which is built on this and represents a new way of framing mineralogy. So let's talk about distribution analysis. This is a way of visualizing how Earth's minerals are distributed through time and through space, that 4.5 billion year history. And we do this very simply to begin with. This is the number of mineral locality occurrences going back 500 million, a billion, all the way back to 4 billion years. And in this particular case, these are all the first row transition metal elements, things like cobalt and copper and iron and nickel. They're colored by their oxidation state. In fact, this diagram has eight dimensions to it. We don't need to go into all of that. But what you see right away is that the distribution of minerals through time is not uniform. And what we found, and many other people have seen this as well, is that there are pulses of mineralization that are associated when supercontinents are formed. Now, there's a good reason for that. Supercontinents coming together when 2 continents collide and mountains are formed. These are mineral forming events. And furthermore, those minerals are preserved in the cores of the mountains. So you have good reason to find pulses for these Kennerland and Nuna, so forth, Rodinia. We also see very systematic changes in the average redox state. So here's copper minerals, they occur +1, +2 forms, and the ratio of 2+ to 1+ changes systematically. And you can do lots of quantitative tricks with this for all the transition metals and show the average change in the near surface environment. We can plot these on a skyline diagram where you can compare and contrast all of those first row transition elements. You can do this with other sets of elements as well, other properties as well. We now have online, you can go to our website, you can click on your favorite element and see how those minerals have gone through time. So you can compare any individual element and its minerals. And we can do things like work with our friends at the University of Sydney who have developed the G-Plates platform. That's a platform in which they model how the plate segments have changed through time. Now, this goes all the way back now to more than 1 billion years in their model. I'm just going to show you the last 350 million years or so, and the distribution of new manganese minerals shown as colored circles, and the circles are colored according to the oxidation state, 2+, 3+, or 4+ of the manganese. And what you'll see is those dots line up primarily. When you see a new dot coming in, it's almost always at or near a plate boundary. So here we see what is beginning to seem like a kind of predictive tool. If you want to find a new set of deposits of a particular element, it really targets you. Geologists have known much of this already, but this gives us a much more quantitative setting of how that works. Okay, the second topic, mineral association analysis. And this is a really important new direction, using artificial intelligence to find new mineral deposits. And what you do is you look for association rules. Association rule is something you're very familiar with, because if you've ever bought a book on Amazon or some other service, or you liked a particular movie or book, often you'll quickly get, within a second, they'll say, oh, you might like to buy this product. That's a recommender system. And it's using millions and millions of records of what people like and what they don't like. And then use that algorithm to say, well, if you like this, then you're probably going to like this as well. So that's how it works. I recently tried to order a copy of Jonathan Lanine's Astrobiology, which is out of print. The only copy available was $300. I did not buy it, but they immediately said, I'd like these books. I'm not sure why. It didn't make much sense, but that's a recommender system. So Jolly and Ralph, who I mentioned about MinDat, he said did the same thing. I love the mineral wolfenite. I want more locality. He says, can I predict a locality where wolfenite will be found, but it hasn't been reported? And he went through MinDat and he said, what are all the minerals associated with wolfenite? What are the minerals that are never associated with wolfenite? Can I figure that out? And he predicted this particular locality, and collectors went out and they found wolfenite. So I don't think that's a huge surprise, but it had never been done before. You know, it was always used to be gold is where you find it. Now it's where AI predicts it will be. And so here's a paper that we have published recently in PNAS, in which we predicted a bunch of lithium and rare earth element deposits in North America. All the icons are the predicted localities, and the red ones are ones where subsequently companies or collectors have gone out and confirmed our predictions. So now every mining company in the world is using this method. Here's one for carbonate-bearing uranium deposits. You'll see there are a bunch in Europe, some not far from here. So this is really an exciting new direction to be able to predict what's going on using these large data resources and standard technology, standard programming that's used by many organizations. I'm going to depart from script just a little bit, because on Monday, we have what I consider a really exciting new paper coming out in PNAS. I just found out a couple of days ago that it's coming out on Monday, so that's when it's released. But this is where we use the same kinds of techniques, but to try to detect life in the most ancient carbon-bearing rocks, 3.5 billion-year-old rocks from Australia and from South Africa. And we use machine learning. There's no biomolecules left. And people have sort of said, well, there's nothing we can do with those rocks because you can't find a lipid, you can't find an amino acid or anything like that. And we said, let's just look at the little fragments that are left because maybe they contain information. Long story short, if you have a biotic material that's fragmented, the fragments are distributed differently than if you have an abiotic thing like a meteorite. You can tell with, in many cases, more than 90% probability that you have an ancient life form. And so we're reporting here life in 3.5 billion-year-old rocks based on entirely the molecular and photosynthesis in 2.5 billion-year-old rocks, which is quite fun. Okay, network analysis. Network analysis is sort of my favorite way of thinking about mineral systems, because you think of a network, a social network, all the people in this room are connected in some way to other people in this room and people outside. And the structures of networks has a great deal to tell you about how a system works. So these are networks of rocks. A rock is simply a community of different coexisting minerals. So here's a granite. And if you take all of the common rock-forming igneous minerals, each one of these nodes represents a different minerals. Every rock type is embedded in this. So there's granite, there's olivine basalt, there's nepheline syenite. If you've taken a course in igneous petrology, everything you learned is basically embedded in this. Also, all the phase diagrams are in here. All the reaction series, like Bowen's reaction series, are in here. It contains an incredible amount of information. And just to show you the power, our recent paper we published expands on this. I took about 2,000 different igneous rocks, all the coexisting minerals, and there are 115 relatively common igneous minerals in those rocks. And this is a diagram showing their coexistence. And once you do this diagram, you say, okay, now let's use something called community detection. Are there clusters of minerals that are more closely related to each other than others? This is unsupervised, which means this is just the algorithm telling you that. And lo and behold, you come up with 4 main groups, which are very similar to the kinds of things that igneous petrologists would tell you. But we see that minerals are very, very tightly clustered. And now this is an interactive diagram. I haven't made this point yet. This is called a force-directed diagram, where every one of these links is a spring. You can change whether the link is there or not, depending on the percentage of times the 2 minerals coexist. If they never coexist, there's not a link. But then you can say 1% of the time, 10% of the time, 100% of the time, sliding the vernier. You also can change characteristics of the size and shape and shading of the nodes. You can also look for a specific mineral. So here's an interactive. You can go online and use our networks, and they're highly interactive. We're changing now the strength. You just saw a bunch of nodes disappear. And that's because we got up to about 50% here. And so some of the nodes were no longer linked. But still, we have these 4 very clear clusters. And now we're going to start from much higher, 78%. Very, very strict. Notice that these, now they're now really separated out, but we still have 4 clusters. Also, for those of you who are really into the weeds on this, these represent gaps. The daily gap is extremely well known. That's the one right here between granites and ultramafic mafic rocks. But there are clearly other gaps as well, which have never been described in the literature as far as I know. So there's a lot for igneous petrologists to do here. Okay, so now we're going to go back, put the thing back together, and I'll show you how you can manipulate this. I love the mineral bertrandite. It's a beryllium silicate that's found in pegmatites. So we can say, let's find bertrandite. There it is. And now let's see what bertrandite is connected to. That's sort of cool. Now let's change this from degree centrality to just the sheer abundance. You'll see 2 big circles. One of them is fluorapatite. It's found in almost any kind of igneous rock. So it's got a big circle there. And the other one's, I think, magnetite. So again, you can do this. You can spend hours playing with this and learning from it because there's structure here that tells a lot. Here's a copper network, 243 most common copper minerals, in this case colored by composition. So we have up here in red the sulfides and sulfosalts, no oxygen but sulfur. We have here oxides, carbonates, other things with oxygen but no sulfur. Here are the sulfates with oxygen and sulfur. You see they're compositionally discriminated. And in fact, there are through this diagram lines of oxygen and sulfur fugacity. Also lines of temperature, lines of pressure, all sorts of things. I should also make the point, when there's 243 nodes here, this is a projection from 242 dimensional space. Because it's every node and its connections to everything else. So you can manipulate this and move it around. I'll show you that. Here again, now we're looking at abundance, the most commonly found mineral is chalcopyrite. It links to almost everything else. And there's a lot of science in here, but this is just fun. I mean, if you go online, you can play with these things. Okay, and you can do this in 3D. Here's Dan Hummer's network of 400 manganese minerals colored by their oxidation state. And you'll see there's 3 sort of nodes here. These are phosphates, manganese phosphates from granite pegmatites. These are all high pressure phosphates from metamorphic deposits. And this thing is like the surface, a lot of the black manganese minerals, we call this thing a hairball in network science. And you can see these different kinds of minerals, but you can do this in 3 dimensions now and rotate it and zoom in and zoom out and see structures and click on any one node and see what it's connected to and so forth. So again, the vast amount, if you're a manganese mineralogist, I mean, the amount of information that's stored here is quite astonishing. And you can do this in virtual reality if you want to. You walk into the network. It's quite disorienting at first because you have all these things and you can basically click on any one node and it tells you what it is in the. It's amazing, fun thing to do. That's Shauna Morrison, who's my colleague in so much of this. Other ways to visualize, but I'm just going to show you because it's like eye candy, but it's really cool. Coexisting minerals, 30 cobalt minerals, and what's called a core diagram. We do clay diagrams. This is 72 by 72 diagram of coexisting chemical elements in minerals. So when you have a hot spot, like what I'm really interested in is cobalt and arsenic, much more common than you'd expect based on their crustal abundance. That's how this is colored. And there's, over 5,000 pairs. We do this now in 3 dimensions. So here we have 27,000 different combinations of 3 chemical elements. And this is all interactive. If you look at the upper right there, you can pull out individual planes and zoom in on them and pick your 3 favorite elements or whatever. It's fun. Okay. So finally, mineral evolution, which was so qualitative before, we're trying to turn into the evolutionary system of mineralogy, which is a more quantitative approach. So here's what we do. Remember before I said a mineral species is idealized chemistry, idealized structure. So IMA protocols use the minimum amount of information to distinguish quartz from calcite from other sorts. What we're saying is we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to lump some species, we're going to split some species, and we're also going to include things that don't have a very clear crystal structure, what are called amorphous materials, because they're important. I'll show you what I mean. Take diamond. Now in the IMA system, diamond is one thing, it's pure carbon in the diamond crystal structure. But we have pre-solar diamonds, which are nanoscale. They formed in ancient stars more than 5 billion years ago. We have type 1 diamonds formed deep in Earth. These are high temperature, high pressure in an aqueous environment saturated in carbon. We have type 2 diamonds, high temperature, high pressure in a metallic liquid saturated with carbon. Impact diamonds, which form, for example, when an asteroid hits a coal measure. And then we have this weird stuff called carbonado, which is a sintered diamond that usually looks black, very dense. I don't think anybody really knows where it's from. These are different kinds of diamond. They form different times, different places by different processes. The world record, as far as we have so far, is pyrite, which forms in 21 different ways, 20 different kinds of pyrite, some high temperature, some low, aqueous fluids, sulfur-rich fluids, abiotic, but sometimes with biology. And so if we find pyrite on Mars, the first question we should be asking is, yeah, that's great. What kind of pyrite? Because they tell totally different stories. And so this is what this system does, is it complements the other. Now, in other cases, we lump. Tourmaline, there's about 40 species of tourmaline right now. That one crystal over here, because of what's called zoning of composition, magnesium, iron, OH, fluorine, and different ratios, there are 8 different tourmaline species in this one crystal, according to the IMA. We say, no, that's one kind. So we lump them together because if you have one formation environment in one crystal, that would be it. Ooh, what do I have here? Uh-oh. We're gonna have to try to do this.
Supposed to join another network.
Okay.
Pencil, maybe.
It's here someplace, I know, maybe somebody else knows how to do this more quickly than I do. Is it over? Okay, I'm getting close. Do I?
Pencil, maybe.
I can't see what that says.
Accept.
That's it?
No.
Over here? Except, do I?
Yes.
Oh, do the black red thing up here?
Yeah, do that.
no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah.
Victory! Okay, so we include amorphous materials, volcanic glasses and coal and other things that were included in 19th century mineral textbooks but aren't included today. And that's really important because about 70% of some of the samples that Curiosity has found on Mars are amorphous materials. So how can you understand the history of a planet if you don't include the amorphous solids? Okay, so what I did during COVID, crazy thing, all the species of minerals, each one in a different row. So there's now about 6,000 rows in this table, 57 different modes of formation. And by hand, because you have to go through the old literature and read deposits, I basically for each mineral said, what are all the different ways that mineral forms? About 10,500, 11,000 different ones in this table. That's 6,000 by 57. And this allows us to do an evolutionary system, which I've been doing with my colleague Shauna Morrison, who's now at Rutgers. 8 parts are published. It'll be 12 parts in all. Parts 9, 10, 11 are in the works right now. Hope to finish it in about 3 years. And what we do is we use a binomial nomenclature in which the second name is almost always the IMA species, like graphite or moissanite. But the first name is the environment. So here's a type 2 supernova. And we know from the isotopes that this graphite was formed in a type 2 supernova. So that's just one kind. Here's an AGB star, AGB moissanite, silicon carbide. And then what we can do is make a bipartite network, working with my colleague Anirudh Prabhu. What you'll see is 2 kinds of nodes here. The star-shaped nodes represent different kinds of stars. The diamond-shaped nodes represent different minerals, and every mineral is connected to one or more star, every star connected to one or more minerals. Then we can expand this as you go through the stages of mineral evolution, the solar nebula. This adds interstellar clouds and some gases and ice. We then have primary chondrule mineralization. Remember that was the stage 1 after the stellar mineralogy. Then we have the different kinds of achondrite meteors. This is the aqueous alteration, the thermal alteration, and also impact alteration, about 300 minerals in all. Those are all the meteorite minerals that fall to Earth. We then speculate on what earliest Earth, before the moon forming event, might have looked like. About 450 different minerals, some of which are many meteorites, but the green ones are new to planet Earth. By the way, there's the original stellar network. It's still embedded in there. It has to be. We're just building outward. And we think this is what Mars may look like in terms of a network of minerals. And now I'm going to take a deep breath and fast forward you to all of mineralogy in a single network graph. There are 6,000 little brown nodes. There are 57 nodes representing different modes of formation. The colors here are now looking at subclasses. So these are high T alteration. These are highly evolved igneous rocks. You're going to see green pretty soon. Those are biominerals and so forth. So you got a huge amount of structure here. All of mineralogy, in a sense, represented by a single graph. And I'd love to spend more time with that, but I'm going to conclude by telling you some of the things we found that were quite surprising to me. First, 90% of all the mineral diversity on Earth is directly or indirectly a consequence of water-rock interactions. Water is the principal reason that Earth is mineralogically diverse. Rare elements play a disproportionate role. So there are 41 chemical elements that are essential in one or more mineral species. And if you add all those minerals together and have a handful of soil, only 1 in 10,000 atoms will be one of those 41 rare minerals. And yet they're responsible for 42% of the mineral diversity on Earth. In other words, they're crystal chemically so important. They create boron and beryllium and lithium. They create new environments that wouldn't exist otherwise. So you make all these new minerals. Life plays an incredibly important role. More than half of all the minerals can be formed through biological processes directly or indirectly. More than a third of all minerals are only known to form through some kind of biological process. And finally, we can look at network metrics. And the structure of Earth's mineral network is fundamentally different in a number of ways from that of Moon, Mars, Vesta through its HED meteorites. And we wonder whether this might not be a biosignature itself. The structure of the network of minerals reveals the presence of life on our planet. So with that, I'd like to conclude this Earth's mineralogy. As we've seen, it's evolved over 4.5 billion years as a consequence of new physical, chemical, ultimately biological processes. We've now entered this age of mineral informatics where we can turn this idea into a quantitative reality. We can analyze in visual mineral distributions, their diversity. We can make predictions about what's going to happen in the future. And with that, I thank you very much. I thank the Swiss Crystallographic Society and you for your attention. Thank you all for being so patient with my inability to manipulate. But
Thanks a lot. I think we have a lot of time for questions.
please.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I learned a lot, and I wonder what type of technique do you use for dating all those minerals?
Yes, so the question is about dating the minerals. And fortunately, we have many, many isotopic systems in which they're relatively long-lived radioactive isotopes. So we can use uranium-238, for example, very common in many of these minerals in small amounts, but our analytical techniques are able to detect ratios that uranium to its daughter product, lead. And there's potassium argon dating, there's dating that you can do sulfur using rhenium. And so geochemists have come up with this array of remarkable ways of dating individual minerals or individual mineral deposits. That's what we rely on, is the radioactive decay, a little clock.
Yeah, most of the time, what type of error do you expect?
Well, that depends on the individual deposit. There are all sorts of things that can lead to error. One is that if you have a very small amount of those isotopes, it's just statistically difficult. Sometimes a rock will have gone through several periods of forming and then heating up through metamorphism and forming again. So you get layered imprints of different time periods. Sometimes you get a zoned mineral, like a mineral called zircon, for example, where the different layers of the minerals are actually different ages, and you can calculate how long it took the mineral to grow. So there's lots of different kinds of errors. In our mineral evolution database, we have a huge amount for each of those 200,000 points. We have all sorts of what are called metadata describing how it was done, what it was done, which laboratory, which technique, and we try to include errors as well. So that's a very, very important point. Every one of these databases is going to have some built-in errors, and so you want to make sure that you document that thoroughly when you build the data resource.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the talk. I very much enjoyed it. I have a question if you're going to add a node for human-made minerals within slag deposits, and also, things that are byproducts, also things that are made on purpose.
So we've written several papers on minerals of the Anthropocene, but in terms of adding it to the database, it's not something we've done yet because it's still very controversial. The International Mineralogical Association does not consider those minerals. And this is a human endeavor. How do we classify things? What do we consider important? But we're very keenly aware that what we're presenting here could feel challenging to the IMA. So we're proposing a new system of mineralogy. The other one has been used for 170, 180 years. And it hasn't changed very much. So what we're trying to say is our system is complementary to theirs. We rely on their names of minerals. We rely on their expertise. And we just say, here's an alternate framing of the mineral kingdom. And politically, that's probably more, rather than sudden. And we are pushing the amorphous thing, but rather than fighting them, we're starting an amorphous materials working group within the International Mineralogical Association to try to figure out what a classification system might look like if it included those materials. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a similar question about the errors, but with respect to the coexistence of these different minerals. And there has to be huge difference in the statistical error for some of them.
Yeah, so this is the challenge of what's called defining a rock's mode. That's a technical term in petrology, where you have a rock like a granite. It has a whole group of coexisting minerals. And the problem is that some of those minerals might be secondary. They might have been alteration products that occurred long after. That some of the minerals might have formed in a metamorphic rock at different times. So you have one set of minerals here, and then you overprint those with other minerals. So when you say the minerals coexist, the errors are often in the interpretation, not in the identification of the minerals, but rather interpreting why they're there. So we have some very strict policies. We look for in igneous minerals, for example, we look for things called triple junctions, where you have an equilibrium texture that's been shown over many, many decades of work by petrographers who look at rock sections. And we say, so the 2000 igneous rocks that I went into the literature and analyzed, I looked very, very carefully to see which of those minerals showed primary textures. But there nevertheless are going to be errors. What one hopes in data science, and what has actually been shown over and over again by simulating, you can't get a database and then you artificially put all kinds of errors in the database. You do the same kinds of analysis, network analysis, and others that I've done. And it turns out until you get to very high percentages of 20, 30, 40% errors, the structures don't really change very much. So it's astonishing how this kind of statistical average of a system will kind of overwhelm a small amount of errors. But if you have a database that has a huge amount of errors, then of course, the old expression garbage in, garbage out. I hope that helps. Yes, please.
Thank you for your time and comment. I have a question about, it is necessary for those minerals to be stable in ambient conditions.
Almost all the minerals that we find in museums are not stable in ambient conditions. That's one of the remarkable things, that we have so many minerals. I mean, a classic example, of course, is diamond. Any diamond is way outside of what's called its stability field. And if it just transformed, it would transform a phase called graphite, what you have in your pencil, a very different form of carbon. But the fact is, because these chemical bonds are so strong in most minerals, once the mineral forms, you take it from its original temperature pressure condition down to Earth's surface, and very often they'll persist. Not always, and in fact, one of the interesting things was why some minerals are rare. It is not necessarily because the mineral itself is rare, it's because it doesn't last very long. The mineral named after me, Hazenite, forms in a phosphate-rich lake in California. That's the only known locality. It only forms in the summertime when there's lots of evaporation and the phosphate content goes up so high that microbes can't survive. So they have to basically excrete crystals. It's microbial poop, Hazenite crystals. And then every time it rains, all the Hazenite on Earth disappears. And then it comes back because the microbes make more. So if it's rare, now maybe it's more common than that, it's just so hard, the conditions, it just doesn't last very long. That's, what can I say?
So good thing we have a dry day today.
Maybe we can go find out. Yes.
Thank you for your talk. Are there some minerals which are existing on Earth, but not in the solar system, for example?
Yeah. So we've actually used this kind of statistics. You can do so many fun tricks, and we're working with a mathematician named Greta Heisted at Purdue University, who's a statistician and has applied new techniques. And she showed that the distribution of minerals, there's a few very common minerals and more rare minerals. And of the 6,000 species, more than 20% are only known from a single locality on Earth. And you can do something called an accumulation curve. It's used in biology all the time to look at ecosystems. To show that the mineralogy in Earth, even if you played the tape 10 to the 20th or 10 to the 30th times, you'd never get the same mineralogy. You'd find some other sets of rare minerals, but the ones we see on Earth today are very, very unlikely. So this is just a characteristic of complex evolving systems. We think that there's a certain degree of stochasticity, or it's not inevitable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. Do you think that because the ancient terrains mostly disappears because of plate tectonics, that some of the minerals that are classified now as recent could actually be older just because they disappeared?
This is a very difficult thing to know for sure. What is the oldest of anything? You know, say, oh, I found the oldest, and fill in the blank. And you've seen these headlines all the time, but then someone says, I find one that's even older, and then I find one that's even older. And especially for rare minerals, how do you know? And ephemeral minerals, I mean, what could be, you know, there's no, for example, salt, sodium chloride is the mineral halite. Well, there are salt deposits that are 200 million years old, maybe 300 million years old. But there's no salt deposits that are 1 billion years old, or 3 billion years old, certainly. And yet we know, just because the oceans were salty, there must have been halite throughout Earth's history. It's just they're not preserved. So there will be those biases. We have actually studied using statistical methods the biases, and we thought, oh, maybe if you do this, you'll find that the old minerals are much harder than the recent ones, because soft minerals will wear away faster. And that's true, but it turns out that that's not the whole story. It's not just the fact that hard minerals last longer. It's the fact that biominerals are, on average, much softer. So the minerals that were formed, for example, in coal measures in the last few 100 million years are just inherently softer. So you have these two biases: biominerals that are more common now, softer; old minerals harder because of the resistance. So you really have to tease out these statistical trends very, very carefully to understand the deep past. Yes, please.
Thank you, Bob. I think it's a beautiful vision of the mineral world. And it's on Earth, right? It's based on Earth. So you showed three main mechanisms: water, the solvent, tectonic plate, the centrifuge, and life, the catalyst. Okay, so let's say we knock one out. We knock the water engine. Take Titan, for example, or Venus. Is there a way to predict the evolution based on what you have from Earth?
Yeah. I think there will be a way. I think we have to understand one of the hardest things to do, and this is part 9 of our system, are the water-rock interactions of the near-surface environment. In fact, a former student of some of you may know, Marco Bermanac, who got his master's degree at Bern and is now working in Graz in Austria. He's leading the effort on part 9, and he said, oh my gosh, you know, all the other systems have one paper. He said, this is going to be at least 3 big papers because water rock interactions are so complicated. So until we understand all the nuances of that, it's going to be difficult. But down the road, I think, yes, that's a real ambition, to be able to say in detail, why is Venus or Mercury or the moon the way they are compared to Earth and maybe Mars.
And the solvent we know on Earth is water.
Yes.
Maybe ammonia. So maybe the solvent is the key.
Yeah, I wrote a speculative paper on the mineral evolution of Titan. It's really interesting because on Titan, water becomes the primary igneous mineral. In cryovolcanism, water heated from below comes out and forms the hard landmass. Organic materials form the lakes, of course, but the evaporite mineral on Titan will be primarily acetylene. Now, if you're thinking of going to Titan and lying on a beach, I'm afraid to disappoint you because acetylene forms very sharp needle-like crystals. So the shoreline of the Titan lakes, the methane and ethane lakes, are going to be these black, shiny, sharp needle-like crystals. Not so comfortable for sunbathing, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Last question. Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned it briefly about the anthropogenic level of step. Does your approach help you think about what new possible mineral industrial society could generate in a systematic way?
Yeah, actually, there are a number of my colleagues in material science that are doing this using machine learning, AI, large language models, where they take a box, an imaginary box, and fill it with different combinations of atoms and shuffle them and come up with stable structures. And these models have become so sophisticated they can generate 50,000 new possible structures per second. I mean, far more than chemists get ever since, because you think you have a periodic table of something like 90 stable elements and all the different ways you could arrange them. I mean, there's just no, so in the old days, of course, chemists had to mix this with that and then change the ratios a little bit. Now you can do it in silico in an instant. Astonishing to me. Yeah, my colleague Tim Strobel at Carnegie is one of the people doing this work. And they also use network analysis to explore stability landscapes. How you can get from one phase to another through a landscape. It's extraordinary work. We're in a new age of material science. I think Howard Flack would have been so excited because he was a pioneer in creating crystallographic databases. He really was the pioneer in doing this. And now we use these to generate the large instance. Like for AI, you need to have a model to enter it. And thanks to Howard Flack and his contemporaries, this is now part of our scientific legacy.
So I think we can thank again Bob for